adaptability, and I do want to thank staff for putting in that extra effort in what has been a very challenging year. I'd also like to thank the Budget Committee members in advance for their patience with the process this year. And to all attending tonight and subsequent budget nights, thank you for being involved. And thank you to your families and those you live with for making space for us at the kitchen table or living room for virtual participation. Just a reminder that this evening is the introduction of Budget 2021. We won't be entertaining any motions. It's a night for overview information. Following the presentation by staff, I'll be going to the floor for any requests for information for subsequent nights. In order to make this process more efficient, it will be helpful to get those requests to staff in advance. And I'd also like to remind committee members that if they don't make those requests tonight, they can still do so via email. And I'd encourage you to do that sooner rather than later so we can make this process as smooth as possible. So with that, we will get started with the presentation, and I will turn it over to Don.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Council. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just on the front end, reinforcing what was used in terms of setting the priorities for our budget and guiding us when we were preparing the draft budget for your consideration. Council will be well acquainted with the CK Plan 2035 and Council priorities, but for the benefit of our listeners and taxpayers, we're going to do a brief review. Our long-term plan for Chatham-Kent, CK Plan 2035, has a number of different focus areas that over time need to be considered to make sure that we continue to build a prosperous and sustainable community. The four that you see on the slide there are economic prosperity, health and safe community, people and culture, and environmental sustainability. Each and every one of those needs to be considered over the long term. But in any given year, there might be a decision that Council needs to reinvest more heavily in one of those areas versus others. Steve, could you have the next slide, please? There's three additional components that are very important at budget time. Financial sustainability, all of the decisions we're making, we want to make sure are going to be sustainable for our community in the long term. So when we're making recommendations to Council, where the decisions are being made in a way that we think that it's in our best long-term interest. It's not just trying to save a nickel, 1 year to have to pay for it back in the long term. We want to make sure that the decisions are going to be wise financial investments for the long term. We've also heard loud from this Council that open, transparent government is critically important. So there is efforts not only with the budget process that we're undertaking tonight, but throughout all our major decision making to make sure that we're reaching out to our community and involving them in the budget and other decisions that we make week over week in Council meetings. So there are some steps that we're going to be recommending investments in that area to improve the process. We've heard over the past several months that that's increasingly important. Certainly Council's made that one of their term priorities, and we're making efforts to double down and make sure that we've got the resources in place to do a better job on a go-forward basis. Resiliency, given the last 11 months that we've gone through with COVID and our flooding that we've had on a number of different parts of our community, it's emphasized the importance of making sure that when we're developing our long-term plans, that we do so in a way that we recognize that we need a certain level of resiliency to have the resources when required to respond to a crisis. And I think the COVID crisis has been a huge example to all of us of why we need to make sure that we have some surge capacity in our ability to respond when it's required. Next slide, please, Steve. For the listeners' benefit, Council every term establishes a series of priorities, and those are the things that Council wants to focus on and move forward in a major way during their term of Council. And we're starting off with growth. This is critically important. Council in 2020 in February approved a growth strategy, and the idea that we all want to see a community of Chatham-Kent where we're growing our tax base, we're growing the number of residents. We can have a healthier, more vibrant community if our population is growing and our economy is growing, and we have more people to contribute to the ongoing work of our community. So starting off this year, all of the recommended investments we're making that would be in addition to what we've had in previous years, all of them would be focused on Council's term priorities, and many of those are in direct support of our growth strategy that Council approved last year. Next slide, please. Environmental sustainability, it's something that came to the forefront over the last 2 years with Council, and there's ongoing work in that area. This is another area where we've historically not provided the same level of resourcing. For many, many years, we were focused principally on economic development or the economy. Environmental sustainability has to go hand in glove with our investments in these other areas in order to make sure that we're going to be sustainable in the long term. And the recent experiences we've had with erosion and flooding on a number of our communities emphasizes the importance of paying attention to environmental sustainability and issues impacted by climate change. So there are some additional investments we're recommending this year. Community wellness, the health and wellness of our community certainly was tested during COVID, and we are, we're painfully aware that there's been a number of members of our community that are more vulnerable. They needed additional support. We're trying to make sure that with some of the investments we're making in affordable housing, we're able to provide some additional supports to those individuals and provide them with the type of secure environment in which they can thrive and move forward. Next slide, please. Community engagement, I've touched on this already. We're trying to make sure that when we're going out and having conversations with our constituents and people that are going to be impacted by the decisions made by our municipal government, that we're doing that in a way that engages the stakeholders, the community residents themselves, so that they have every opportunity to not only have voice to it, but help us shape the type of decisions that we're making. And that's equally important with our budget process. We had in the neighborhood of 1,000 people that participated in our budget survey. They've given us feedback. Again, through the outreach of our community meetings, online meetings this year, we're hoping to engage the community even further. But the community engagement I'm talking about here is the year-round exercise and trying to make sure that our residents have a voice in building their community. Every year, one of the most areas of greatest focus or interest for the community and council is any recommended changes in staffing. The two positions you have here are two recommendations that we're making for an increase in our staffing numbers. I think it's important both for council and the community to know that these are two additional staff, but overall, we're actually recommending that we reduce our staff ranks in 7.5 other full-time equivalent staff. This would be, two additional staff. So what we're really actually recommending to council is there would be a net reduction of 5.5 staff positions for 2021. But we believe these two positions are critically important to help support the term priorities that council's had. As I've just discussed, these are key areas that council's indicated we want to move forward. And to do that, we need some additional resources. But we are sensitive to any increases in staff. And in fact, this year we've been able to recommend to council that there'd actually be a net decrease of 5.5 staff. And we'll get into more of those details in a moment. Next slide, please. With that, Mr. Chair, I'd turn it back over to you and Gord and Steve to run through the details of the budget presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. And, thanks, Gord. Go ahead.
Sure. Sorry. Thank you, Don. It's Gord Quinton speaking now, Chief Financial Officer, and I'll take you through some of the details of the budget tonight. In front of you is our agenda that we'll be going through. So first up, we have our budget overview. The executive management team and all staff were tasked with meeting a budget target of inflation for our operational needs and approval for infrastructure spending within the currently approved financial model. We had to address the downloads of additional costs from the province to property taxpayers, in addition to increased costs from our conservation authorities. And we had to fund a 2020 base budget requirement of close to 1%. These are items that were in our base budget last year but were funded by one-time sources of revenues. So they come back to needing to be funded for 2021 as well. And then, of course, there's the continued funding of our approved financial plan for our asset management plan, which continues with a 1% recommended increase in infrastructure spending. And in addition to that, this council has recommended increased funding for storm sewer infrastructure of $675,000 in this budget. And we're beginning to the funding of the property tax need portion of our new growth plan. And we'll get into more details of that later this evening. So often council decisions in past budgets have an impact on the current budget. This slide indicates that going back to 2013, we're still having some recovery from items that were decided back then with our winter control salt shortage. And then there's been some items from this council that have been added that impact 2021 budget as well. So in total, there's $995,000 that needed to be funded from this budget. The executive management team considered over $13 million of new costs and prioritized and have come up to deliver a draft budget requiring approximately $6.4 million or 3.96% of new tax funding. There's a lot of details in the slide of where the changes were, but it's more easily understood of where we landed on the next slide. So we've broken the budget down into these 5 main buckets. So first we had the cost of maintaining existing services, which is mainly the inflation costs, less operational efficiencies found throughout the organization. And Don alluded to those 7.5 full-time equivalent reductions that we had. And we also offsetting costs, we did have fairly good assessment growth this year, particularly in new residential units. So that landed us at needing 0.30% for that bucket. We then had the upper level downloads and the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund reduction. This is additional costs and less revenue coming from other levels of government or the increased costs of our conservation authorities levies. So again, this needed a 0.70%. So as you can see, we're already at a 1% increase before we really start touching our any of our new asks. So then we have the items that we're building for a better tomorrow. And the first item is our investing in infrastructure, where we need a 2.10% investment. And that's to replace, we have all our aging infrastructure, whether it's our 850 plus bridges or thousands of kilometers of roads and all the facilities and infrastructure that we have. And this includes that additional funding for storm sewers and the inflation on the infrastructure costs. And the next section is what we called investing in our community. Now, this is those new service levels demanded by both residents and council. And many of the items that this council identified in its initial strategic directions, there's been some studies done and a lot of work done over the last couple of years, but now's the time to implement some of those items. So as priorities are better rural internet and improved transit, increasing affordable housing and helping our homeless, maintaining our high quality emergency services, and keeping the amenities that you all value. And the last bucket is relatively small compared to the COVID costs, but there is a 0.43% impact to our 2021 draft budget from our lost investment income. Chatham-Kent actually faced over $17 million in COVID-19 costs in 2020, but this expense that you see here is the portion that we doubt that will recover any funding from upper level governments. And so we see this as an impact to local taxpayers. So in total, that comes to 3.96% as the total of these 5 buckets that are on the slide in front of you. So many of you may be wondering, why are municipalities needing increases above the rate of inflation? And I can say that single-tier municipalities across Ontario are facing increases in the 3 to 5% range. And we have to be very careful not to just compare to our increases to small, lower-tier communities around us that mainly only look after roads and parks and perhaps a fire department, but really don't have the levels of services, particularly our community human services area that a single-tier municipality has. So some of the reasons that I've highlighted here of why these increases are high, and first is the upper level of government. So both the federal government, we believe, has the capacity, even after COVID, to greatly increase transfers to the province to cover some of the provincial healthcare costs that would remove the need for downloading those costs to municipalities. And some of the things that we're facing are increased health unit costs, housing, and childcare. And then we also are not seeing much increases over the last few years from upper levels for municipal infrastructure. There's been a resistance to increase any funding. Secondly, we're starting to see a slow in growth of commercial new builds as we move to a digital society, and that is placing greater cost on residential taxpayers. So as retail moves online, we see a lot of vehicles going up and down our roads delivering boxes all day long, and it does wear and tear on our roads. But there's a lack of a digital tax. I called it here an Amazon tax, but you can call it Spotify or whatever service that wherever you deliver order items online. It's really that is having impact as there's less need for commercial space. So that gets that's a shift to residential property owners. Next, property tax systems across the world are sometimes not perfect to meet the needs of today's. I believe that municipalities do need a share of a consumption tax, such as the HST, to help fund that infrastructure gap, so that it's not just on taxpayers, property taxpayers that pay that cost, but it's on all taxpayers across the country that fund that infrastructure gap. In some instances, there are perhaps service levels that are greater than the demonstrated need, particularly in long-established services. Once something's in place, it's very hard to take that away, as even if the need has gone down, there are people that rely on those services. And Chatham-Kent has not yet implemented development charges, but that is the study is ongoing right now, and we'll be coming back in the spring for a final council decision on that. So in summary, modernizing revenue approaches to reflect the current economic trends will position municipalities to thrive as the technological and economic landscapes evolve. This next slide just demonstrates the 3.96% impact on average home in Chatham-Kent to be approximately $117. This next slide is very, very important, and I want to make sure everyone is listening, because it's very good news. Every business in Chatham-Kent will likely significantly save and have lower 2021 taxes. And what has happened is that in the 2020-2021 provincial budget, the province lowered the business education taxes for all businesses to 0.88%. This change is effective in 2021 and will result in most businesses paying less in tax, even when considering the proposed draft 2021 budget increase. So on the first two bars there, you see the industrial sector where we're showing a 5.34% decrease. And at the lower half, you're seeing commercial where we're seeing a 5.02% decrease. That's including the 3.96% draft budget that, most businesses, I would say 95% of businesses in Chatham-Kent will receive at least a 5% reduction. So that is great news for those businesses, especially during this COVID-19 year and with all the struggles that they're facing. And as we finalize Chatham-Kent's climate change action plan, we will in the future be fully incorporating it into our budget processes and have full reports to council about the impacts of our budget adds to the and how it affects the environment. So that is a work in progress. The final climate change action plan is expected in the spring of 2022. And now I'll pass it over to Steve for the next section.
Thanks, Gord. As Gord said, I'm Steve Brown, Director of Budget Performance Services. So starting off with some background information, in 2020, Chatham-Kent received slightly under $334 million in revenue from a variety of sources. Property tax accounted for 50% of the revenue at just over $166 million. Of the remaining 50%, both provincial and federal grants were a significant portion, making up just under 38%. This includes items such as our Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund and the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund grants. This number is down from 39% in 2019. The remaining other revenue is comprised of items such as our user fees, our fines and penalties, and permit fees, to name a few. The Chatham-Kent's overall expenses, 41.6 are employee related. This is down from 41.8 in 2019. Expenses related to infrastructure, debt, and contracted out make up a significant portion. Contracted work is largely related to capital works, including the design and engineering of some of the larger capital works projects within the municipality. The slide shown here is information that Chatham-Kent inserts into the final tax bill. It outlines the departmental distribution of taxes on the average residential property. Since 2010, Chatham-Kent has made significant progress in lowering its overall tax-funded debt. At the end of 2020, there was approximately $9 million in tax-funded debt outstanding, made up of public housing, the convention center, and Riverview Gardens. If no new debt is issued, tax-funded debt will keep falling, and by the end of 2032, there will be no tax-funded debt outstanding. So taking information from the BMA study that will be presented to council next Monday, the 2020 taxes on a modest 1,200 square foot home are $329 lower in Chatham-Kent than the average of the 110 municipalities that participated in that study. So while you often hear that tax rates in Chatham-Kent are higher than many other areas, the assessment of properties in Chatham-Kent also tend to be lower. In order to be able to collect a similar value in taxes, the tax rates need to be higher in Chatham-Kent because of this lower assessment value. As noted on this slide, the tax rate is approximately 50% higher in Chatham than the Ontario average. However, Chatham-Kent actually collects less tax on that same house, even taking into account that higher tax rate. So comparing a single family detached home, the taxes paid in Chatham-Kent are below both the group and the survey average for a similar house in other municipalities. When you compare both taxes and water and wastewater costs, Chatham-Kent is below both the group and survey average. Chatham-Kent has one of the lowest cost of services in the survey of 110 municipalities. So Chatham-Kent's large size and geography present numerous challenges to the municipality in its overall budget. This slide highlights the many areas where Chatham-Kent is unique and the reasons why it is difficult to compare Chatham-Kent to other municipalities. While Chatham-Kent only has 0.7% of the Ontario population, we have over 20% of the municipal drains in Ontario and over 5% of the bridges. With only 43 people per square kilometer to pay for all of the services, there are significantly less people to pay for those same services versus places like Windsor and Sarnia. Also, because of our large geography, we must also maintain and staff 19 fire and 6 ambulance stations. So I think this slide could be hard to read, but what this does is it provides a breakout of the average residential assessment and taxes broken out between our pre-amalgamated communities. The average farm assessment and taxes broken out by ward is highlighted within the chart on the left. As you will note, farms in and around Ward 6 are assessed higher on average, with Ward 4 North Kent having the second highest farm assessment and taxes. The chart on the right highlights the impact of a 1% budget increase on commercial and industrial properties, which equates to a tax increase of $94 and $93 respectively. It should be noted that this chart does not take into account the reduction in the provincial education rate, and that over 90% of the commercial and industrial properties in Chatham-Kent would see a reduction in their 2021 tax bill, even with the proposed budget increase. The largest proportion of property taxes collected within Chatham-Kent come from the residential properties at 63%. This is followed by commercial at 17% and farm at 10%. So this slide highlights the amount of taxes collected by property class for each of the pre-amalgamated communities. Nearly 40% of all property taxes collected in Chatham-Kent are collected within the city of Chatham, followed by Harwich Township with 8%. The budget process determines the overall financial requirements of the municipality, while tax policy determines which property classes will pay for what share of the overall financial burden. Tax policy is presented to Council in April and provides recommendations on the tax ratio changes, which in turn may shift a proportion of the tax burden from one class to another. Tax policy also takes announcements from the province, such as the education rates, and new legislation, such as tax ratio limits, in determining how much of the total tax burden each property class will pay. In addition to the tax levy discussed tonight, there are also local improvement levies that are charged to some properties for works completed, such as drainage and water works. Some areas also have additional area rating for services that are provided to a specific area, but not all areas of Chatham-Kent, such as transit and street lights. So during the 2021 budget, we're also having to address further cuts to the Ontario Municipal Partnership funding grants. The OMPF funding was reduced by $822,000 in the 2019 and 2020 budget years. In late 2020, we were also notified that our 2021 grant would be reduced by a further $341,000. So this means that over the last 3 budget years, our OMPF funding has been reduced by nearly $1.2 million, which has been transferred onto the property taxpayers of Chatham-Kent. In 2020, not unlike 2018 and 2019, Chatham-Kent had above average assessment growth that can be primarily attributed to the increase in residential building permits. In 2018 and 2019, Chatham-Kent's assessment growth was higher than average due to the completion of the Enbridge Panhandle pipeline and Gateway casinos, respectively. It is expected that our assessment growth will continue to show strength due to the ongoing residential building permits, but that this may be offset by new community improvement plan property tax grants that Council approved in 2020 for new commercial, industrial, and multi-residential properties. I'll now turn it back over to Gord, who will talk about infrastructure.
Thanks, Steve. So just first, just going over the 2017 asset management plan that was approved by council, and just reminding everyone that we have made this commitment of funding over the next 20 years of having annual tax increases of 1% per year to fund our asset management plan. And council approved that 1%, but actually the recommendation of the asset management plan was 1.4%, and 0.4% was to be found through divestments and efficiencies. And while there has been some ongoing efficiencies found, we all know that it's been hard for council to be able to divest the assets in the municipality. So we are likely facing an additional gap there when we update our plan in 2022. Some good news, we do have decreasing debt payments, but just a reminder that part of that asset management plan approved that all expiring debt payments get transferred to infrastructure as well. So that's included in that 1% requirement is that all expiring debt gets transferred to infrastructure. And then we need to provide for inflation so that we don't lose our purchasing power. So the recommendations in the 2021 draft budget, just what I said there, we have the 1%. We have our year 3 or 4 of our extra funding that this council directed us in its first budget meeting for storm sewers. And then new this year, we have our year 1 of our growth plan funding, and we're looking to phase that in over a 3-year period. And we have our expiring debt, which has been transferred to infrastructure, and our inflation needs. So in total, we need $4,060,000. But of that, only 2.1% is being asked for as new taxes, as some that's reshuffling from other areas. This pie chart just shows the breakdown of the 12 major categories in our asset management plan. But if you see the blue section to the right of our road networks, the gray section at the bottom of our bridges, roads being 32%, bridges being close to 20%, and the yellow section of our storm sewers being close to 20%. We're faced with 72% of our assets are those large categories, and that's it just takes such a significant investment to maintain those. And like I said before, that's why it'd be nice for upper levels to participate in some of those investments. I'll spend some time on this slide because it's a little bit difficult to understand as there's a lot of information, and it has a dual axis on both the left and the right there. So I'll explain that. So along the bottom, we have those 12 main asset categories. On the left axis, we have the annual requirements in millions of dollars. So for example, if I chose the paved road networks, the blue column to the left, our annual requirements are approximately 27 million. That's shown in blue from our asset management plan that we delivered. Our 2020 funding is being shown in orange here. So, as you can see, it's approximately 14 million here. So we're just slightly over 50% funded in our paved roads area. As you can see, storm, the next category, we need 20 million of annual funding, but we only have approximately 4. So we're $16 million short on that one. And even our bridge area, where we have seen quite significant investments over the last 10 years into our bridges, as they are a safety concern if they're not kept up to quite high standards. We have an annual need of around 18 million, but we're funded around 13 million. So just on those 3 categories, there is such a great shortfall in our asset management plan, and that's The other categories you see to the right, a lot of them are better funded. If you remember, gravel roads council fully funded that in a budget a couple years ago, and many of them are better, but the dollar requirements to those categories are much less as well. So when you take a look at our entire plan, we are sitting at about 52-53% funded, which is represented by that red dash line that's going across. So we still have a long ways to go, but it's mainly in paved roads, the storm network, and bridges and culverts. And often council gets the highest complaints about paved roads, for example. And with the money that we are currently collecting, we're able to do a fairly decent job on our arterial roads, but the residential road network really takes a beating and really does not have much funding to maintain when we're at this level. So you may see some of the local roads getting worse until we're fully funded. And the next slide is just highlighting the categories with the largest deficits. So again, the top three are the storm networks, storm sewer network, the paved road networks, and bridges and culverts. That's where the money needs to go over the next 10 years. And I'll turn it back to Steve.
Thanks, Gord. So taking a look at the projected reserve balances at December 31st, 2020, we're projecting a total reserve balance of $166 million. This is made up of mandated reserves, which are created for specific purposes, totaling $34 million. And this encompasses items such as the federal gas tax reserve that we are mandated by the province to track separately. The reserve assigned for life cycle and other is projected to have a balance of $61.7 million at the end of 2020. These reserves are assigned by council, and council has the ability to change the purpose or use of these funds. The life cycle asset management plan reserve are assigned towards the asset management plan, which are often saved up for major projects. So for example, within the city of Chatham, we know that we have the 3rd Street Bridge, which will be replaced in the near future. The asset management plan reserve builds up funding to complete major projects without needing to raise taxes in 1 year to complete those projects. The balance at the end of 2020 in the reserves, and these reserves, is estimated to be at $70.5 million. So tab 9F of the budget binder contains the staffing details that Don discussed earlier, which include 2 new base funded positions and their strategic importance. The executive management team has been able to find efficiencies, resulting in a reduction of 7.5 positions. However, this is offset by the 2 positions being requested. So this equates to a total FTE reduction of 5.5 being proposed. There are a total of 34.48 one-time positions being proposed in the 2021, with 11 of them carrying over in the 2022 budget. One-time funded positions are those for time-limited projects. A large number of the one-time positions being asked for in the 2021 budget are related to emergency housing. All of the one-time positions are being recommended to be funded through reserves or other sources, and they have no impact on the tax increase being proposed. The future year's tax impact provides a conservative projection of what Chatham-Kent will be looking at for budget increases over the next 5 years. With projecting out 5 years, there's always going to be many unknowns, such as the provincial downloading that has happened, and also with COVID-19, which has impacted both our 2020 financial position and to some extent our 2021 budget. As we move into the development of the multi-year budgets in 2024, we'll also be looking to start building a rate stabilization reserve to mitigate any significant events in the future. So with that said, we are currently projecting over the next 5 years that the budget increase will be approximately 4% each of those years. So available tonight, all of the councillors have it in paper form in your binder, but all of the information that you see in your binder is on the web, except for this presentation, which is being broadcast on your TV and will be replayable shortly. The Police Service Board is currently finalizing information and will be providing a presentation on Wednesday, January the 27th, and we will have a closed presentation on labor relations later that same evening. Due to COVID-19, we made the decision back last October that our public consultation process for the 2021 budget would be held online. So we have scheduled 3 Facebook Live events over a period of 3 days. These are on Tuesday, January 19th at noon, Wednesday the 20th at 4, and Thursday, January 21st at 6 p.m. We've scheduled them at different times throughout the day to provide CK residents with numerous opportunities to not only learn about the budget, but to comment and have their voice heard. Council deliberations on the 2021 budget will start the following week on Wednesday, January 27th at 6 p.m. Written deputations can be submitted for each night of the Budget Committee deliberations up to 3 p.m. of that day. It can be then sent to ckfps@chatham-kent.ca. So for tonight's meeting, we have received 3 written comments that have been sent to the CKFPS email that I will read out right now. They will be sent out to council before the budget deliberations start. So this first one is from Paul Hess, to whom it may concern. Hello, I'm originally from London, Ontario. Beyond school, at the time, there was no work. I moved to the GTA and became a paramedic in Toronto for 38 years, long time. My wife, a retired emergency nurse, and I decided to sell our modest family home, raise 3 children, and found a place in your wonderful community. We broke even on the sale and purchase. The people are the community, the attitudes and actions, a general understanding of one another amidst a social presence. I have not felt anywhere. Chatham-Kent is a safe, warm, and welcoming feeling and environment. A big city dark cloud has lifted. We began to support the local economic community immediately upon arrival. We have met residents. We have volunteered. Our property taxes exceed my old age security benefit. I was going to write the government and have them send you my check directly and any increase accordingly. That was abandoned about as humor in our household. We fear it may become a reality. I saw the services spending, and while in Toronto, is not sustainable. I expected a gold fire truck and police tank to be driving the streets while the homeless waved in a parade. When the people fall, there is nothing left. We have no garbage pickup, pay separately, no sewer, volunteer fire, and limited need of police. Carbon tax is fast becoming a reality. Paying for the spending of this pandemic will begin a wave of despair. Intelligent thinking and planning and ideas will reign supreme. People must come together to solve these upcoming problems in lieu of throwing scarce resources of money at it. We are entering a new world, a new beginning, new choices. I want to be proud of my local government, innovative and respected. Raising taxes is easy. Please challenge your careers, with all due respect. The next one is from West Summerfield. We need you to build a high-rise or buy one to be used for homeless people alone. And another 2 or 3 high-rises for geared to income, as apartment rentals have now reached 1,450 in Chatham. And the third from Chad Gardner. You need to do whatever it takes to have 0 tax increase. These times are forcing lesser services. Make the cuts needed to give us citizens a small break this year to burden this pandemic. A tax increase is not the answer. Dip into the reserves if need be to resolve the difference. Don't save it for future unnecessary expense. It is needed now. That is the end of the comments, so we'll now move on to the departmental presentations, and Thomas Kelly is up first.
Good evening, Council and residents of Chatham-Kent. My name is Thomas Kelly. I'm the General Manager of Infrastructure and Engineering Services. I would like to start by first highlighting 4 areas of interest that are included in the 2021 budget, and that is transit, the environment, fiber, and the asset management plan. Starting first with the expansion of transit, prior to COVID, annual transit ridership stood at 330,000 people per year. This was an increase of 23% when measured over the prior 4 years, so a significant change. In response to this growth, Chatham-Kent developed a driving forward strategy that included almost 200 hours of public engagement across all communities within the municipality and presented this to council last year. Based on this input, included in the budget are 5 key items related to transit. First, we have a new 5-year lease service contract for the base service that runs from 2021 through 2026, and that was at a cost of $300,000 per year. Next, we are proposing the continuation of 3 current pilot projects. These include the on-request evening service, the midday interurban service, and finally, the 5th fixed route in Chatham. As a cost savings, we are also proposing the elimination of the seasonal beach bus due to its low usage. We are seeing less than 10% of cost recovery on this service, where typical services in transit are around the 25% level. Next, I'd like to look at the environmental climate change technologist. This is an existing position that's been in place for the last 2 years, and it's focused on the council term priority of environmental sustainability. The position was originally approved in 2019 as a contract position, and in this particular budget, we're asking to make it a full-time position due to its importance. We have proposed to support this position with no tax impact through the Blue Box Fund. This is a provincial program that provides funds to municipalities for waste management investment, where the formula is such that the greater the tonnage of recyclables we collect, the greater the funding. And this position has a direct role in achieving this goal. Along with the day-to-day operations, this position also assists with managing the changes that are forthcoming in the industry. And that includes the diversion programs moving to full user responsibility, and also the potential food waste diversion away from landfill strategy. The position also will manage the Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Fund, which we have committed to $25 million over the next 10 years from the municipality. And with that, we receive also $16 million from the federal government. And finally, the development and support of the Corporate Climate Change Action Plan is a key part of this position. This technologist position is important to us, and it allows the community to move forward in a positive direction with respect to the environment. Next is the fiber technical support. Included in the 2021 budget is a 2-year request of over $800,000 to continue the employment of 4 existing staff to support the private sector expansion of fiber and internet services. There's been tremendous activity in this work, and it's very exciting for the community. The team is responsible for the permitting process, authorizing locations so there are no conflicts with existing or future infrastructure, and also to ensure compliance in the field and special projects like the Thames River fiber crossing we just completed. We also have plans in the works for a second crossing. Last year, we processed over 115 permits, and based on this year's indication, that amount will double, with a potential expansion to fiber service to Wallaceburg, Tilbury, Blenheim, Dresden, Townsville, and Bothwell. Finally, with respect to the asset management plan, as Gord mentioned earlier, this was approved by council in 2017, and it detailed over the $5 billion in municipal assets that we have. The current budget is close to $60 million. It allows us to maintain about half of our assets. As highlighted earlier, included in the budget is a request to increase this budget through a 1% tax increase, inflation, applying expired debt, and bumps into storm, sewer, and growth planning for the total incremental infrastructure spend of $4 million. There are several risks that exist as it relates to the existing AMP plan, including inflation, the rising costs of materials, and the high demand for skilled labor. It is important to note that the $217 million requirement identified in the ZUZEC study last year along Lake Erie is not included in the plan. So again, it is not in the plan. We are currently conducting detailed environmental assessments at Rose Beach Line and Talbot Trail. Council will receive an update on Erie Shore Drive next month. So council can expect further financial updates to these areas in the coming year as the information becomes available. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. It's Gord Quinton speaking again. Not only am I a Chief Financial Officer, but I'm also the General Manager of the Finance, Budget, and Information Technology and Transformation area. So I'm going over three of the highlights in my area. First, the digital transformation. We have a very detailed report and presentation coming to Council at your January 18th meeting. So I won't go far into this tonight, but accented by COVID-19, it is time for Chatham-Kent to digitally transform both our back-end services and eliminate manual and paper processes, and also to expand our online services to the public. And this is a very large $1.2 million ask, but it is funded through IT lifecycle reserves with no impact on taxes or the 2021 budget requirements. Next, the growth plan. Council has heard many times about our growth plan. In this budget, we begin to tackle the costs that will not be covered by future development charges, and have allocated $100,000 a year as year 1 of 3 phasing. We expect growth-related expenditures of $30 to $50 million in the next 5 years, but a small portion of that will need to be funded from taxes. But we do expect the vast majority of those costs to be funded by the future development charges once they're approved in the spring this year by Council. That study's ongoing. And thirdly, just a caution, Council funding operations from reserves or one-time funding does cause an impact on future budgets. And we're experiencing it this year again from the 2020 budget, where there was a large impact into tonight's draft budget. And we want to make sure that we limit that impact as much as we can into 2022. We do hear that the mantra of we're saving money for a rainy day. I understand that with COVID-19, this is a rainy day, but it's fine to fund one-time items, but funding the base budget with one-time reserves, it does come back to bite you in following budgets, and I just want to give that caution to Council. Thanks. I'll turn it over to Bruce.
Thanks, Gord. Good evening, everyone. Bruce McAllister, General Manager of Community Development. We had 3 items here as well. As Gord just noted, Council has expressed a strong commitment to growth as a priority, while also wishing to keep future tax increases to reasonable levels. Currently, community development and engineering staff are beginning to work on some strategic background servicing studies and preparing for updates to our official plan in order to appropriately plan for future growth, which we are anticipating to continue based on what's going on right now in terms of application volumes and projections over at least the course of this year for sure. Specifically in planning services division, a grade 6 planning technician position is being recommended as a 2-year pilot. This position is proposed to be funded 50% from our planning application fees and 50% one-time funding from the Community Improvement Reserve. Specifically, the position is deemed necessary to support the Council-approved growth strategy. With the approval of our new Community Improvement Plan last March, we've seen a lot of uptake in that, which is a good thing, and there's a need for us to resource the processing and review of those various applications that come through, but to also provide much needed support to our development review function, which has increased steadily over the past couple of years and is off to a very strong start here in 2021. The planning technician position would then support other members of our planning team by assisting in the implementation of the development approval process, incentive programs, data management, and mapping needs that we have in the division as well. The last thing I wanted just to speak on quickly is just before the holidays, the Community Attraction and Promotion Division, which has the mandate of overseeing our tourism piece, transferred over to the Community Development Department as well. And it's recommended that the hiring of a tourism development officer role at a grade 6 on a 3-year pilot contract, which is again to be funded one time through the existing tourism reserve, in order to support the sector work and to add bench strength to the existing tourism group, which is currently 2 people. It goes without saying, obviously, the tourism sector has been particularly hit hard by COVID-19. Unfortunately, they're the first group in and will probably be the last out of this. That said, the federal and provincial governments have noted and responded to this with sector support funding being made available. We just want to ensure that our local operators are aware and can benefit from these supports. Obviously, the research that's out there now shows that consumer confidence to travel will take some time to return. But in the interim, there's certainly opportunity to prepare and to use digital assets, including websites, social media, et cetera, to keep CK tourism operators in our tourism sector top of mind. So when COVID does abate and recovery is clear, sector and operators need to be ready to step up marketing and to safely receive guests again. If you recall, Council, back during the Economic Recovery Task Force, tourism was identified as certainly one of the many sectors needing specific supports. So with that, I will turn it over to corporate services in Kathy Hoffman.
Thanks, Bruce. It's Gord Quinton speaking. Kathy Hoffman, the General Manager of Corporate Services, was unable to attend tonight's presentation, so she has provided me some notes that I'll read to you concerning the return to work specialist position that's in the draft budget. So from 2019 to present day, Chatham-Kent has contracted TRAC, T-R-A-C, a disability management service provider, to facilitate the timely and effective return to work of ill employees. We demonstrated through our TRAC experience that new resource was committed to being proactive about getting employees back to work safely and on a timely manner, and that committed resource paid for themselves last year with a drop of costs of sick time costs for the first time in a number of years. And we now feel that the resource could be most effectively be moved in-house. The resource we are intending to predominantly dedicate to Riverview Gardens, where sick time is high. And while we prefer that this position be base funded, what we have done in this tough budget is recommend a 2-year pilot with this position funded from our corporate sick time reserve. Metrics will follow this pilot to report back to council at the end of the 2-year period if we are then determining that a permanent resource is required. The priority to RVG is given the significant crisis the home has been in from a staffing perspective for many years now as it relates to staffing, resources, injuries, and illnesses combined. So just in summary, there is no 2021 tax impact for this request, but it's a very important position to corporate services. Now over to April.
Thanks, Gord. April Reitdyke, General Manager, Community Human Services. So I'm going to speak for a bit regarding some of the impacts we are seeing in Chatham-Kent with respect to human services. Chatham-Kent continues to have a shortage of affordable housing, and market rates have increased significantly. In 2020, the average market rent for a 1-bedroom unit reached $938, a 48% increase over 2015 rates. For housing to be considered affordable, and we get asked this question frequently, what does affordable housing mean? It really comes down to the fact that the cost, it must cost less than 30% of a household's gross income to be considered affordable. And to put that in perspective, thinking about that $938 1-bedroom unit, a single adult on Ontario Works or a single adult working full-time earning minimum wage would need their rents to be below $219 or $740 respectively for their rents to be considered affordable. On top of this, 2020 has seen a 28.7% increase in homelessness in Chatham-Kent. In November of 2020, our Employment and Social Services team worked with a record high 158 individuals experiencing homelessness. Chronic homelessness has more than doubled since the beginning of the pandemic. Chatham-Kent, we continue to operate under a housing first philosophy. Housing provides the stability needed to wrap services and supports around our homeless. Without enough affordable units available, emergency and transitional housing will continue to be required. Currently, our rapid rehousing program is housing between 30 and 48 people nightly in motel rooms around Chatham-Kent. Staffing support, a significant ask in the budget this year, and other operational costs for things like laundry and security add to the ongoing costs of emergency housing. And while we are receiving significant dollars from the province for this, the housing crisis needs to be fixed in order for us to house people. Until more supportive and affordable housing is available, our teams will continue to struggle placing people into their own homes. Our entire team is working diligently with multiple community partners, ongoing organizations such as Indwell, but the housing needs far outreach the housing supply. Over the past 10 years, our housing team has worked and committed to developing 176 affordable housing units. As of December last year, 111 of them were occupied, and we have 65 further units underway that will see occupancy in 2021. And it is still not enough. As of December 1st, that same date, we have 759 active households on our rent geared to income centralized wait list. 25% of these are seniors waiting for an affordable one-bedroom apartment. And currently, unfortunately, the average wait time for these seniors is 7 years to get into one of our affordable housing units. Community Human Services has worked diligently to ensure we present a sound 2021 budget to Council. Our asks support affordable and emergency housing, both in builds, in rent benefits, and staffing support to ensure units are built, people are housed, and they receive the support needed to stay housed. Budget asks from our other CHS areas are minimal. I also want to take this opportunity to remind Council, and we talked about this a year ago, of the provincial funding changes that are set to impact both our childcare and early years division and public health. The province has provided mitigation funding for 2021 to offset the funding formula changes, and now has targeted the implementation of these funding changes for 2022. However, childcare continues to operate at full capacity. Public health has functioned under a funding freeze now for several years, and there really is nothing left to trim without it impacting services as we get ready to enter 2022. Between the COVID response and the need for things like emergency childcare, I think it has been demonstrated through this pandemic, the need for local programs and services, and the real need for adequate provincial funding for these services. And I want to just end with a quote from our Chief Public Health Officer of Canada, Dr. Theresa Tam. While the COVID-19 pandemic affects us all, the health impacts have been worse for seniors, essential workers, racialized populations, people living with disabilities, and women. We need to improve the health, social, and economic conditions for these populations to achieve health equity and to protect us all from the ongoing threat that COVID-19 presents. And with that, I will turn it over back to our next speaker.
Thank you, April. It's Don Shropshire, the Chief Administrative Officer speaking. Council, you've heard about the range of services where we need to continue to invest in. I just want to speak for a moment about, in addition to the financial resources, I expect that over the course of the next 12 months, we're also going to be offering a disproportionate amount of our time, our staff time, to deal with some of the challenges ahead. And the ones shown on your slide, I believe, are going to take the majority of our effort. Over the course of the next year, we're expecting ongoing response to COVID. Our focus is going to be both twofold. It's going to be continuity of municipal operations. We're considered, essential services to our residents. One of our top priorities is to make sure that we can continue to offer those essential services without interruption and in a manner and efficiency that our residents expect. There's also an expectation that we're going to be offering direct support to our members of our community. Both the population groups that April just spoke to are certainly high priority, but also ongoing support to our businesses who have been hit hard, as Bruce described, by the impacts of COVID. So trying to get our community back on its feet and thriving, over the course of the next year is going to be something we'll continue to focus on. We've also have a number of initiatives to continue to invest in our community growth strategy. We don't want to take our eye off that ball. That's something is a long-range plan for us, but it requires ongoing support and focus. And as Bruce has described, and a number of our other colleagues this evening, we need to continue to invest in that growth strategy and take every advantage when we are coming out of the COVID crisis, so that we're taking the best possible steps to improve our economic and population growth and support our overall strategy. The last area I mentioned is the community engagement strategy. There is a modest investment of $30,000 we're recommending be taken from reserve to support a customer satisfaction survey. But like the other two areas, these are areas that require ongoing focus from the entire municipal team to improve the way we engage with our community residents. And so these three major areas, in addition to what we're looking at investing for budgets, the commitment from the corporation is that we're going to be making sure that these remain top priorities for us over the course of the next 12 months. And we believe these are in direct alignment with Council's term priorities. Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Chief Case for a word on firefighting, fire services.
Good evening, Budget Chair, Council, colleagues and members of the community. My name is Chris Case and I'm proud to be your Fire Chief. The budget asks from Fire and Emergency Services this year are very much restricted to firefighter safety equipment and the health, safety and well-being of our emergency responders. We will be looking for some calibration equipment that will be in every fire hall, including for the first time our volunteer halls, which will allow firefighters to take the gas detectors that they use to make sure that the atmosphere in a property is safe and be able to test and calibrate that regularly in the interest of not only their own safety, but the safety of our community. We'll be looking to continue into year 2 of 2 with the provision of the new hydraulic rescue equipment, which Council approved last year. And that's the extrication equipment that we use at motor vehicle collisions, which has had a dramatic impact on our ability to deal with one of our more busy jobs, which is responding to motor vehicle collisions. Another year 2 of 2 will be to continue our rollout of new personal protective equipment, or bunker gear as it's called. And that's part of our cancer prevention plan to ensure that our firefighters have access to clean and laundered firefighting gear whenever they respond to a call. We'll be looking to increase the availability of immersion suits and helmets, which will allow our firefighters to respond to water rescue incidents. And it will reflect the fact that every fire hall in Chatham-Kent has the potential to have to make a rescue from water, not just the ones that traditionally have a river or the lake in their station area. And finally, I'm pleased to ask for an extension of the Municipal Employee and Family Assistance Programme to all our firefighters, including our volunteers. And that will provide real and emotional support to firefighters when it's required, and will help us to continue to battle the post-traumatic stress that our firefighters quite often are exposed to during their daily work. With that, I'll conclude that, and I'll hand you back to the presenter.
Brock, that's at the end of our presentation, so we'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Gord. So at this point, we still will not be entertaining any motions from the floor, but if any members of Budget Committee have requests for information to administration, if you put your hand up now, we can entertain those questions. Okay, Judy, I don't see any hands on my screen, but this is my first time sharing with this, so I'm not sure where I should be looking for them.
Thank you. I see Councillor Hall has his hand up,
Councillor Hall?
and Councillor Bondi and Councillor Thompson at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Judy. Just a quick question, I guess, just to expand on the, I know we have 3 community meetings that are going to be held virtually, our community consultation meetings. I'm just wondering, I may have missed this, but just wondering if staff can kind of give a little bit more detail about how those meetings will run, where people can find them, that sort of thing. And I guess specifically, you know, are people going to be able to have the opportunity to ask questions right during those consultation meetings, and how about, like, how will that go about? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. It's Gord Quinton. Steve's just turning back to our slide that has our upcoming community consultations meetings. So we have them at 3 times for approximately an hour each time, on January 19th at noon, January 20th at 4 p.m., and January 21st at 6 p.m. And it will be a Facebook Live event. The communication teams will be sending out links to those events in the coming days, and it will be the residents can ask questions to the executive manager team, and each meeting there will be a very short, about a 5-minute presentation at the beginning, and then we'll get into the question and answer period. If anyone has any questions or comments about the budget that they'd like to pass on, those are 3 opportunities to do that. In addition to that, we also are accepting written deputations that we would read ahead of our council, our budget committee meetings. So they can be emailed to ckfps@chathamkent.ca, and we'll read those to council, and any comments that or deputations that anyone would like to make.
Okay, perfect. So I just want to clarify, so during the Facebook Live meeting, so people will be able to, like, basically just put in comments and questions, so staff will be answering them, like, live during these consultation meetings, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Next, Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Chairman McGregor. My question is for Gord. Gord, just for clarification, there's been some, I think, confusion publicly and maybe even within council, that obviously considering this year's pretty difficult year, when we say if we use reserve money to top up shortcomings, we're told, and the public is told, that that puts us, behind for next year. And I think that's somewhat confusing, because if we look at, say, a household in the same light, if there's a deficit or a debt and one has some money in the bank but uses that money, in a savings account, uses that money to offset or pay off some debt, like say a car loan that you can't pay because you've lost your job, how does that put the municipality behind? Like, I get it, because the reserve wouldn't be there next year, so that's pretty simple. But through one of the deputations, there was a call for using reserves. Maybe it wasn't a deputation, maybe it was a letter. But if reserves are there and we're going to raise taxes, why don't we use the reserve money to offset the tax increase? Because it seems like there's money in the bank that it will be there almost in perpetuality. And for what? Like, just to be there endlessly and endlessly. And I'm sure you've got the right answer for me, Gord. Just, I know there is some confusion with that, so I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Hi, it's Gord speaking, and thank you, Councillor Bondi. That's an excellent question. It's hard to understand, and I'll try to work through it. There's really two main issues with that. So first, I'll start with an example. Let's say council implemented a new service at a cost of $100,000, and this was a permanent service that was ongoing, and it's going to cost $100,000 every year in perpetuity. You could pull $100,000 out of reserve to cover that cost this year, but it does mean that you'll be faced with that same request for $100,000 into the base budget next year as well. And so it's that part that's sort of coming back to bite you a second time. So then it comes down to, well, as you said, well, perhaps there is reserve money available, and that's I guess another misunderstanding that's often made in the public is we do have reserves in our bank account. However, the vast majority of them are already dedicated by council to specific items. So whether it's our asset management plan, I'll give you an example in our asset management plan, we often save up for big projects. So an example coming up very shortly is the 3rd Street Bridge, which is a massive bridge project, very expensive. So we do save up for those projects, and those are saved in reserves. And often some of our projects do take 2 to 3 years before they're designed and engineered and built. So sometimes there's money being carried forward in our asset management plan reserves for those purposes. And the other part of reserves is often there's a reserve for a very specific purpose. So council may have set aside money for I'll give you an example. A Riverview Gardens might have a reserve where it puts aside the occasional surpluses that it may have to be able to cover a future year's deficit, because we budget the best we can, but sometimes the operations aren't quite smooth. So there are some specific reserves, but over time those average out and really aren't. There really is little there over time as well. So we don't have an endless supply of reserves to do that. Now, as I indicated in when I was talking about this, if we often use the term saving for a rainy day, and I get that it's raining this year. So with COVID-19, but we of course are fine with paying for one-time items out of reserves because it doesn't come back again next year. But I just want to caution not to go very far down a road of funding base items that are ongoing from reserves, because eventually the well runs dry and you got to pay for it.
Great, thank you, Gord. Just so that I'm clear, I don't think I was speaking to new initiatives because, yeah, of course, that would be a year after year cost that would just whittle away reserves until they're dry, which wouldn't take too long, depending on whatever that initiative is. But I just want to be clear for what you're telling me, that we do use reserves when it does come to big projects like the 3rd Street Bridge, for instance. So when we approve a budget or we go through this process of deliberation of budget, when it comes to infrastructure funding, the 3rd Street Bridge, for instance, which is only one small piece of the infrastructure pie, right, that isn't necessarily budgeted in the 2021 budget. That's also reserve money from the infrastructure reserve. So we are using reserve money is, I guess, my kind of bottom question, because that seems to be the question that I get, not too often, but sometimes, that we have all this money in reserves, we're not using it. And of course, in 4 weeks from now, when we raise taxes, people are going to say, well, holy, we've got all this money in reserves and you're raising our taxes. But can we assure the public that the reserves, which effectively is money in the bank, is being used for one-time projects, not for new initiatives? I get that. If we're going to implement a new program that's going to cost, as you had mentioned, $100,000 a year, and we don't budget for that, well, eventually that reserves, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself, but we do use reserves for things we're saving up for. So the reserve money doesn't just sit dormantly, collect very little interest, and we raise taxes while we have all this money in the bank. If that makes any sense. I don't know.
Yes, it does. Like we do, the reserves that we have, the majority of it is already specified for a very specific purpose. I gave the example of the bridge lifecycle reserve that's being set aside for bridges, but there is purposes for most reserves. We do have a very small amount of unallocated reserves, which we call our strategic reserve, that council often keeps for things that come up mid-year after the budget's approved. So
yeah, that's the one we dip into every now and again.
Yeah, that's the one, exactly. That's the one where something comes up mid-year. We often point to, but and I recommend keeping some in that reserve too, for unknown things that may come up during the year. So I guess that's the largest issue is yes, there is money in the bank, but there's specific purposes for the majority of those reserves, whether it's in the 5-year infrastructure budget or in operational plans of various divisions. It's not that there isn't a we're not sitting on a bank of reserves that are just for general purposes that could be used. We actually have very little in that reserve.
Well, great, Gord. Thank you very much, because I think that would probably answer a lot of questions when we hear, in the media that, well, Chatham-Kent's in a wonderful financial position and we've got all sorts of money in reserves, and then we raise taxes and people think, well, what are we doing? Like, we've got all sorts of money in the bank and we're raising taxes. But as you've now just explained, that money is earmarked for projects, and there are some rainy day funds, which is probably a good idea. So yeah, that really helps out, Gord. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Bondi, and thank you, Gord. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much. My question is more in the vein of looking for more information. Either in an email or when we come back, there was a slide there making reference to the income shortfalls for the municipality. And I was just wondering if we could get that kind of broken out, where those shortfalls were and exactly how much they were.
Yes, just for clarification, Councillor Thompson, do you mean the provincial, the loss in provincial revenues?
No, I was looking more along the lines of, the arenas weren't being used as much, so we lost some revenue there. The library wasn't collecting fines, so we lost some money there. Just looking for those, parking tickets as well. So looking for those line items, actually.
Yeah. So I think I should provide some clarification. So you're talking about the COVID-19 impacts that hit 2020,
yes,
and we're projecting to hit 2021. We did bring a report to council in the last meeting in December. I can't think of the date, but that had our October variance, which was our forecast for the entire year of 2020. That actually detailed $17 million of either shortfalls in revenues, such as arena fees and arena usage fees or any of our user fees that weren't coming in because of COVID-19, and the additional costs that we faced across the organization, whether it was PPE costs or we had some additional land ambulance costs and things like that. The total of about 17 million. So a lot of that detail has been provided to council in that report, and the issue with going forward is the crystal ball of how long is this going to go on, and obviously we're in a 28-day lockdown coming up now. I think the prospects of arenas opening in the next 3 months is becoming slimmer every day. But what the real unknown is next fall. Perhaps vaccines come along and we're actually back to normal in September. That I guess I don't know if I'm being too optimistic there, but so that's becomes very difficult to estimate. But in the end, we're counting on upper level of governments to fund those shortfalls. But yes, we can email out that information again to council.
Yeah, to be honest, December feels like 100 years ago already. I'll go back and look through that report and see if that answers the questions I'm looking for. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Judy, do we have anyone else with a hand up?
Yes, we have three more councillors, Councillor Oche, Councillor Sakachi, followed by Councillor Harrigan.
Okay, Councillor Oche.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Gord. Gord, could you possibly send some of the financials on the Bradley Center, the Capitol Theatre, and also, if I'm not mistaken, we did not apply for the COVID money for this year. I know we had sent a letter asking to use it for other things. Could you update us on anything on that as far as that helping out our budget?
Yeah, so we'll get information for the next meeting on the Bradley and the Capitol Theatre. As far as that same report that I just referred to with Councillor Thompson, we did get $5.8 million of unconditional provincial assistance with COVID-19, of which we had just over $1 million left in 2020 that we're bringing forward to the 2021 budget to assist with those COVID-19 shortfalls for the first 3 months of the year. We then are anticipating it in their spring budgets. Both the federal and provincial government will provide additional funding to municipalities across Canada. So, sorry, I think I sort of lost the train of my thought of your question on that. But we had about $1 million that we brought forward.
Okay, but there was another application that we, I believe, did not fill out, but we asked for money to use it in different ways. Is that not correct?
Yes. So we weren't eligible to apply for it because we still had that $1 million left over. So it wasn't that we didn't apply. We didn't, but we weren't eligible to apply through the provincial rules on the Safe Restart funding that they gave us. What we're hearing from the province is they are working on a plan for us. We hear that from all our meetings with the Ministry of Finance, but they haven't released any of those plans, and they likely won't until the provincial budget that will deliver in March. So we're really up in the air, but we're trusting that the province will come through for us in the end and cover those direct COVID-19 loss of revenues and additional expenses again for 2021.
Okay, thank you for that, Gord. And I'm not sure who to direct this one to, but if I'm not mistaken, 2021 is the year that we could actually sell the Capital Center, if I'm not mistaken, from the provincial money given to us. We had to keep it until 2021 and keep it a theater. Is that not correct?
That I don't have an answer to tonight. But
okay, well, if I could get that for that
yeah.
First meeting, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Oche. Councillor Scotchy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Quinton, I appreciate the conversation we were able to have yesterday. I just wanted to see if you were able to send us an emailed copy of the reserves that all the reserves that we currently have. And just wanted to ask you one quick question, kind of along the similar lines of Councillor Bondi. I noticed in the last few budgets that I've been present with is that administration they find creative ways to utilize the reserves for staffing funding and 1 or 2 time years of funding new staffing. So why would it be so frowned upon in a very challenging year like themselves to find expenses for 2 years that are only going to be benchmarked for those 2 years from reserves, especially when we've had such a challenging year? In conversation in the past, I've kind of expressed my concern that any amount of increase right now, especially to our businesses, and I know that you spoke about the reduction in the levy, but anything that we can do right now is going to be helpful because, I know the analogy I did use prior is to the rainy day, and I still think that this is kind of exactly why municipalities have reserves, because nobody could have ever predicted the situation that we are in now. And I just wanted to touch base on the fact of why we can find creative ways to utilize it for staffing costs, but not so much for funding, different projects or programs.
Thank you, Councillor Scotchy, for your question. So first off, I want to direct you and residents can, through our budget link on our website, get all the information that council has. The entire binder is online now. But tab 9E is the list of all our reserves. And so that's in front of council right now. And to answer your question, about the use of staff, one-time short-term staffing, if I could put it that way. So I'll give you a couple examples. One, I'll go back to the digitization that our project that we're doing in our IT area to assist the entire organization. It's not that we're doing it to increase our staff load to take care of our daily activities. It's to implement special projects that are very labor intensive to upgrade our systems across our organization. So it's an extra level of service, and that's exactly what those reserves were meant to So in the IT world, that's exactly what those life cycle reserves were meant to handle. So that we're putting money away in our budget each year so that we have the resources available for the odd year where we have a major project going, and some of that will be for not all that's for staffing. Some of it's for contracted services or other one-time equipment that we're buying. Another great example in this year's budget, April spoke about our homelessness situation, and we are running temporary and a very much increased level of shelters right now. And that it's a very large number, and we'll get into the budget details during our deliberations, but those dollars are having a zero impact on the tax dollars this year, because we had some provincial funding to help with shelters during COVID, and we're doing a very large drawdown on one of the reserves that April had in her employment and social services area. So there's actually, of the new staff, the 1 year temporary staff that we have, I believe it's off the top of my head, I think it was 19 individuals are with running a 24/7, 7 days a week shelter. So that's we will get into those fine details of every position as we go through the budget over the next couple weeks, and ultimately it's council's decision on that, on those one-time projects, and also if there is a decision to fund base taxes from reserve, that would be a council decision as well. Of course, as the administration, we highly don't recommend it, because it causes that an increase next year if you're funding base budget requirements from reserves. So I hope that answers the question.
Chair McGregor, it's Don Shropshire speaking. If I could just add, council or members of the public could also reference the tab number 7 in their budget binder, and it'll be, again, as Gord said, online, but it summarizes the other funding that's available and recommended. And Gord's just provided a couple of examples from that group, including for the staffing of our homeless shelter. But you can see that there's a number of reserves that we are drawing from. It addresses Councillor Bondi's question and your own question about how we're trying to be creative to provide services directly to our residents, in addition to some of the staff costs that are not long-term. They're for a designated amount of time, but there is a combination of those initiatives that we're trying to do exactly what you just described, Councillor Sakachi, is to try and get creative so we don't increase the burden on the taxpayer. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Councillor Harrigan.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, I believe, is also directed to Gord. Gord, thank you to you and the members of EMT for the presentation and giving us some context tonight. I also have questions about the 0.43 COVID impacts, but more on a future base, I think, than the information report that was sent to council. The first question I have is, are those budget increases called out or identified anywhere in our binder, or is that information that you could provide to us so that we could see a breakdown of what that 0.43 is?
Thank you, Councillor Harrigan. Yes, everything that we talked about today you'll be able to find in the recommended items recommended tab, which is tab 6, or the other funding available if there's either grant money or reserve money used for one-time items that you'll find it in tab 7. So there's line items for each of these. There's for the larger items, there's backup in the binder with briefing notes that have a lot more details on those items. But to your specific issue of what the 0.43 COVID was, that's related to our investment income with interest rates dropping. And so the issue there is, not to get into the fine details tonight, but the issue there is that we see a revenue drop that might take many years to regain. So there may be lasting impacts to that beyond 2021. So that's why we wanted to bring that to council's attention.
Right. And so then based on your comment around lost interest or lost projected interest that we have, I would then assume that if the government, the provincial government is confirming their budget in March and is providing us support, this, whatever is identified at this 0.43% would likely not be eligible for the funding that you anticipate could or could not come down.
Yes, at this point in time, we were forecasting that likely would not be covered. That they'd be covering more direct expenses like PPE or additional services that need to be provided, and the loss of revenues to our arenas and facilities, but perhaps not on the interest in our bank account.
Yes, if only the government would compensate us for lost anticipated interest. Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And the reason I asked the question is only because for those who might be listening or looking at just the title of COVID impacts, it's quite likely that we will see announcements about funding to support communities further if the pandemic continues to progress in the way that it does. And if that is the case, I want it to be clear to our residents that this 0.43% isn't for the same thing that we may get funding for the province. And so I think that is very helpful in clarifying that. Thank you.
Perhaps I can add.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Perhaps I can add just one other. While I have the forum, just reminding businesses out there that are closed to make sure that you're accessing all the resources of the provincial and federal governments. And for example, right now, for businesses that have been shut down because of the lockdown, there are rebates through the provincial government for both property taxes and for utilities being used during this lockdown. So just was putting that plug out while I had the chance.
Great, thank you. Those are all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harrigan, and thank you, Gord. Judy, do we have any other councillors on the list for speaking?
Yes, we do. We have Councillor Kirkwood White, and then I do see Councillor Sakachi's hand up again. I'm just not sure if it hasn't been deselected from the last time he spoke, that's all.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kirkwood White, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the risk of asking a question I'll likely ask on a number of other occasions as we get through the next several weeks. This is the third time that I have been through this budget process, and I'd like some clarification, please, and probably Gord, you're the one that can respond here. It doesn't appear that municipal council members have much opportunity to have a look in detail at the base budget. What we're being asked to do through this process is to approve increases over and above what we approved last year. And while I recognize that there have been some opportunities to reduce some staff, is there an opportunity for us to take a look and to ask questions? And I liken it to a cake. You know, the cake is there. You're asking us to approve the frosting and the candles. And as we get through the process, we take off a few candles, we take off some icing, but the cake is still there. And I wondered whether there was an opportunity to ask some very specific questions about the work that we're already doing that could generate some savings for taxpayers if work was undertaken by other groups and organizations in the community.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And just I guess one point, in the tab 6 of the items recommended, not only are there additional icing being added to the cake, as you said, but we're also taking away pieces of the cake as we go as well. Those that's the net number. Our 3.96% ask is the net number, and there's several efficiencies and the things that you perhaps are looking for in tab 6 that are reductions to the base as well. The other part is it's not just in budget season. All year round, council is presented with many opportunities to dig deep into particular services as they come to council, and particularly this fall, administration endeavored to bring several items to council that would have had an impact on the base budget. So those reports do come to council, and if there is a service that any councillor wants to review closely, I would recommend over the next 2 weeks before deliberations that you contact me or the general manager involved, and we can go over the details of a budget of any department that you'd like if you need a greater understanding what's there. There is in tab 10, there is the last year budget overview that sort of gives a high level view of each division across the municipality and what the costs are to those areas.
Thank you for the answer. I also wanted to just reiterate that I believe that there has already been a request for a listing of capital projects or construction projects or things that council may have already approved, not expecting us to have to deal with COVID pandemics, and wondering whether that list of proposed items will be coming forward shortly for us to have a look at.
Thank you for the question. There are, of course, many projects, construction projects on the go and in various stages of engineering and design across the province, across the municipality divisions on projects on the go. What is coming to your January 18th regular council meeting is the capital budget presented by engineering that has some of those. Our life cycle budgets are usually for replacing things as they come to the end of their life, where our capital budgets are for new things that we're looking at. And not to preview that conversation much, but over the next 10 years, there's over $400 million of projects that we see in the queue, and our capital budget is very small. So council does get to review those and decide perhaps priorities of what's more important on a priority list. There's such a backlog of items though that often that doesn't really impact the tax budget. It's more of what projects are you ready to fund with this year's allotment? So that report's coming to council next Monday.
Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate the response.
Thank you, Councillor Kirkwood-White. Councillor Sakachi, did you have another comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize for taking the floor a second time. I just had one clarification on my questions to Gord, to Mr. Quinton. Sorry, Mr. Quinton. I guess I didn't articulate my question properly in regards to the reserves. So when there's housekeeping done on specific reserves, is that something that your team looks at regularly in regards to if there's a reserve that's been set aside or benchmarked for something that may be no longer is something that will be targeted? So is that something that would then come to council, and then we would approve the reallocating of those funds? Just when I was looking at the tab quite some time for just there's some things in there in regards to like I'm not going to go through line items, but things that I'm not sure we would utilize. So is those things are always on a yearly basis looked at, and then if they've been isolated and dormant for a long time, your team looks to reallocate to other places?
Thank you. Excellent question. Yes, we do that from time to time. In fact, we brought a housekeeping reserve report to council in December where we reallocated some funds to larger priorities. But I welcome it. I know we don't want to get into the details tonight, but if there's, as councilors are going through that reserve tab, if there's specific reserves that you'd like more of an explanation of, please email myself and Steve ahead of time prior to the January 27th deliberations, and we can give a much greater overview of what exactly that reserve for and what would be the impacts if we were to reallocate it to a different area.
Thank you, Councillor Sakachi. Judy, did we have anyone else left on the list?
I have one final speaker. It looks like Councillor Latimer.
Okay, Councillor Latimer, go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor McGregor. This is for Mr. Quinton, and I think it kind of piggybacks on Councillor Kirkwood-White's question. Mr. Quinton, Councillor Finn and myself actually I called you earlier this week once we got our binders, and you agreed to provide us a spreadsheet with kind of a different presentation of the budget numbers for both council and the general public with regard to looking at our actual costs, what we've actually spent since the beginning of our term, 2018, 2019, 2020, and put them in line with what we're recommending for 2020. I appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to seeing that, but I wanted you to maybe elaborate on what that would involve. So often, as Councillor Finn and I were telling you, we have our constituents ask us, well, just how much are you spending on paved roads versus our community human services versus administration versus, and we have that in that little pie chart, but I appreciate that you will put it at the actuals in this spreadsheet, and so I wanted the rest of council to know that Councillor Finn and I had talked to you about this earlier this week. So maybe I'll let Mr. Quinton elaborate on this.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. So we do have a lot of material in tab 10 where it's breaking down our existing 2020 budget into many of those items that you're asking for. We are working on a additional one-pager, more easy to read, summarized version, just to give an overview of where we were at and what these changes mean in our major categories, whether it's our transfer to our life cycle or whether it's our materials that we're spending on our transfers or what's coming in from the province, from whatever category, just to give a better one-pager overview that's more easy for citizens to see that, this is where we were at 2020, and with this 3.96%, this is where we would be in 2021. So that will be posted as new information to the website when it's available later this week. We weren't able to get it ready for tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quinton. I always think it's if you make it simpler, the better it is for both council and for the general public to realize where we're spending our money and where and to see the trends, right? Where to meet our priorities and where we could, everyone's looking at reserves, but where could we possibly maybe cut so that we can get closer to that 0%? Because I think it's we recognize that we have to take care of our vulnerable and keep everyone safe, but we have to recognize this has been a very difficult year for a lot of our residents. And it's not a year that we should be spending unwisely. So we have to make the best use of the limited dollars that we have, and still, look forward to growth over the next year, because I think we definitely are going to grow, but we have to be careful. Anyway, thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, I see no further questions.
Great, good to hear. Hear the hockey game has started already, so that's good news. So just a reminder for anyone that's watching right now, you can still participate in the 3 community consultation events that are taking place on Facebook Live. That's January 19th at 12 noon, January 20th at 4, and January 21st at 6. And a reminder that the Budget Committee will begin deliberations for the first 3 nights, January 27th at 6, January 28th at 6, and February 2nd at 6. These meetings will again be broadcast live on Your TV Chatham-Kent, or can be watched through their Facebook page. And if we do require more meetings, those will be held on February 3rd and 4th at 6. If any individuals do wish to speak on a particular budget item, they can send their thoughts in writing by 3 p.m. each day to ckfps@chatham-kent.ca, and those messages will be read to the Budget Committee at the meeting. Before we end, we do need a motion to adjourn, that the Chatham-Kent Budget Committee adjourn to its next meeting to be held on Wednesday, January 27th, and that the Chatham-Kent Budget Committee authorize itself to meet in closed session on that day to discuss any matters permitted by the Municipal Act. Councillor Harrigan, would you move that? Seconded by Councillor Bondi.
Happy to move that.
Seconded by.
I'm happy to move that.
Thank you, Councillor Harrigan. And Councillor Sakachi, can you second that? Thank you.
Happy to second that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And if there's anyone opposed, let me know. Other than that, the Budget Committee, as per public notice bylaw, Chatham-Kent Council hereby gives public notice of its intention to hold public meetings and adopt the 2021 budget immediately following receipt of a recommended budget from the Chatham-Kent Budget Committee. And that Budget Committee also gives public notice of the need to meet in closed session at any time during budget deliberation processes as permitted by the Municipal Act 2001. And with that, I think that is it for the evening. Thank you again to everyone, and we will see you next week.